What's up guys, thanks for tuning back in again for another tutorial. So this is the first of a three-part series on bass. I'm going to be breaking it down into three different parts. I think that's probably the easiest way to kind of explain and get the best out of it for everybody. The first one's going to be on sound design. It's going to be looking at how to make a bass sound, which is this tutorial. The second one is going to be on processing the sound, putting various different effects and stuff like that on it. And the third one is going to be looking at bass structures. We're looking at different types of bass lines you can add to your tracks. Let's jump in.
Welcome to the project. So we're going to be using two different synths to make a bass sound, and I'm not going to be showing you how to make the perfect bass sound necessarily, but I just want to go through like how I make a bass using a couple of different methods on different synths. So Massive I really like because you can get a nice fat bass sound out of it with the 3 oscillators, and Serum is really good for getting more digital sounding bass. So they're both good for two different reasons. I know there's others like Silent, Spire, etc., but these are the two I kind of know better than the others, so I'm going to I could probably get a better sound out of these. Let's jump in to Massive. So we're going to start by getting the first wavetable in, which is going to be the kind of top bass, and that's Flender's on a digital spectrum on its own. As you can tell, if you can hear it, it sounds pretty dire. Put that on a plus bend, and you can see you kind of start getting that gritty tone that you want out of a top bass, and bring it down an octave. So I'm just going to turn up filter 1 and in between filter 1 and 2. So depending on where you move that, gives you a different tone. Turn that off, and we're now going to look at oscillator 2. And this sounds really just a layer to cover the spectrums that one can't. And that's routed to filter 2 on a low pass, so it's cutting out the high sounds and then letting this one do the work. But if I turn that off, you can tell it does. And then the third one, third oscillator, is going to be the sub. Just turn these two off so if you can hear it a little bit. Just slightly more sine than triangle, and that'll give a nice kind of sub bass sound. One thing to note actually when you're making bass is it's nice to have a spectrum analyzer up, which just helps you judge the frequencies that you're filling out. So if I turn on all 3, you can see there it makes it slightly different. See there's more harmonics coming through. I'll go into more detail about that, and I'll also go into more detail about effects. I'm not touching this at all today. This is purely sound design. So that's helping to give a different tone. I'm going to press the restart via gate, which means that every time the sound plays, it re-triggers, so you get the same sound out of it, which is important if you're bringing the unison up. And that just fattens the sound up, as you can tell. That's got a lot fatter now. So we're going to be using a performer, which is just going to help to change the sound as we go. makes it slightly more interesting. Going to put some distortion on. Doesn't need a lot, or it can get a bit over the top, but just a little bit of subtle distortion helps bring out some nice harmonics, nice sounds at the top end. As you can see, too much, you kind of lose it all. And then a bit more. And then you can add dimension expander, which is kind of take it or leave it. It just gives a bit of width to the sound, but it can be a bit too much depending on what kind of sound you're going for. So I usually put that on a macro. That just adds a bit of width. It's almost like a real slight delay on the sound, but I kind of like it as an added effect. And then you can also add ring modulation, which just changes the tone. Again, it's not something you have to do, but it just can make it a bit more interesting. Especially if you want to say, do something like that. I think that's a bit too much, to be honest, this time around. And that, in essence, is how to make a bass line in Massive. Very, very briefly. I just, like I said, I'm not going massively in depth, but that's a kind of different sounds you can use to get a kind of hardcore bass. Let's see how that sounds in the track. Okay, so bear in mind there's no effects, no processing or anything like that. That's kind of a nice bass sound there to get us going. And now on to Serum. That's the init sound. So okay, we're going to be using some cool digital wavetables to kind of make a bit of a different sound than the Massive bass. As you can tell from that already, you can hear add the second one in. This is a wavetable that I've made myself. I'll chuck that in the description for you guys if you want to follow along. Bring that down an octave as well. Put that on. Finally sub. Put that octave down and direct out. And then we're going to start adding effects. I put the sub on direct out so that the sub isn't touched by any of the effects we add. So things like distortion and things like that can really drive a sub. So that's going direct to the master. So anything we add isn't going to have an effect on the sub. Now this is the kind of This is the deal breaker here. Adding some distortion onto the sound can really help to bring those that nice gritty, those really gritty harmonics out. And then we can add a compressor, which I don't always like to add. I'm going to, for the sake of this tutorial, I very rarely add this in, but it can drive some really nice sounds out of it as well. Just a little bit of EQ there just to bring out some more low end and take off some of that high end. And then finally, just going to add an LFO onto a couple of the wavetable positions, and that just helps create a slightly more exciting sound every time it plays. Oh, and there's actually one other thing that's very important I forgot to mention, is to bring down the rand. And that means you get a more consistent sound, so that every time it plays a note, it will play the same, it will re-trigger. Drive the filter ever so slightly. Bit of drive on the filter. I've added a macro, and that's just to bring the mix up a bit and give the bass a bit of width if you want it, depending on kind of what sound you're going for. And let's hear that in the track. So I mean, obviously there's loads of different types of sounds we can use. I mean, Serum has hundreds of different wavetables. You can make your own. I've added all the ones in from Massive, so it's a really creative synth to make different bass sounds, and it's kind of just a case of finding the right wavetables to start with, and then adding a sub and messing around with very slight LFOs on some of the wavetable positions and things like that, and you can kind of get quite creative with it. And then add some effects as well. So like I said, neither of those sounds are the perfect bass sound, but they're a great basis for kind of making a hardcore bass. And what we'll look at in the next couple of tutorials is, next up we're going to be adding some effects and layering some bass sounds just to get things a little bit fatter and get it sitting in the mix a little bit better. And then after that I'll be looking at different types of bass sounds. I mean, this here is just a very basic kind of offbeat bass. But then we could move these notes around and either do like a sidechain effect, a rolling bass and things like that. So I want to look at those in future tutorials. I hope this was some kind of help to get you started with bass sounds. Like I said, it's a lot of it's just trial and error, messing around with various different filter effects, LFOs on different sounds and things like that. But it's endless amounts of creation with the different wavetables and sounds you can get out of all these synths. So yeah, good luck creating bass sounds, and feel free to drop a comment on anything else you'd like to learn about bass that I could maybe add, what kind of effects, things like that you want to know about in the next tutorial. And I will see you guys soon. Thanks for tuning in.